Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Gary Conway, the actor, joins me for an amazing conversation today. What a career. Starting in the late 50s, Gary was the title character in the monster movies How to Make a Monster and I Was a Teenage Frankenstein. Great discussion about those movies. In the 60s, he became a contract player at Warner Brothers and made the rounds on a lot of detective shows and westerns, but finally landed on a big series, one of Aaron Spelling's very first television series, and it was called Burke's Law. It starred Gene Barry, and he was the police captain, and Gary was his lieutenant, running around talking to murder suspects and other criminals and witnesses. Later in the late 60s, Gary was the star of Land of the Giants, which was a terrific Irwin Allen Sci-Fi show. In fact, his last sci-fi show before getting into the disaster movies of the 70s, starting with shows like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Lost in Space, and Time Tunnel. Over 50 episodes of Land of the Giants were produced until the show was canceled by ABC. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about his castmates and more. Also, more recently, Gary is the subject that Alex Ross used to draw Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four in his brand new graphic novel, Fantastic Four Full Circle. Of course, you've heard about the graphic novel on Word Balloon. I was surprised to learn that Gary was Alex's choice as far as Reed Richards' face. And also, his co-star of Land of the Giants, Deanna Lund, is Sue Storm. We talk about all that. Gary is delighted. It's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast. He and his representation are just so thrilled that Alex made that choice. You'll hear a lot of that at the beginning of the interview. And a lot more, too. Gary's just had this incredible career. Between he and his wife creating a winery in Northern California, we discussed that, to the fact that even in the early 70s, Gary's so good looking, he was a centerfold in Playgirl magazine. Pretty crazy. All fair game as far as Gary's concerned. We have so much to talk about that we couldn't get to everything. So this is really part one, and we have every intention of continuing the conversation in a couple weeks. If you live near the Burbank area, you'll be able to see Gary this weekend starting Friday and Saturday at the Burbank Airport Marriott show, the Hollywood show, and he'll be signing autographs and posing for pictures. I absolutely tell you, take advantage of this because the guy has amazing stories and has had an amazing career. Gary Conway on today's Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners, my producers, if you will, because they give me the funds to keep Word Balloon going via Patreon at patreon.com. If you like the show and want to help out, it would be greatly appreciated. I'm not asking you to break the bank. Can you spare the price of a comic book a month? Even $1 a month would really help me out and keep things going. You know, I've expanded Word Balloon the last couple years to be an almost daily podcast and provide a really great look into pop culture. And that is because I get great help from the League of Word Balloon listeners. Again, if you could help out, it would be greatly appreciated. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you very much for your great support, the League of Word Balloon listeners. A quick note before I get into my conversation with Gary Conway. Gary requested a phone-only conversation. Totally fine. I'm always happy to make my interviewees as comfortable as possible. And he was generous with his time, but it really is me on a phone line and Gary on a phone line as I was having issues with my laptop when we made the call. I didn't want to reschedule. We had already rescheduled a couple times in the past, so it was wonderful to be able to have this opportunity and speak to him. So without further ado, we'll get into this conversation. Gary was already on the record immediately when he answered the phone. So the actual introduction to Gary is a couple minutes into the chat. Totally fine. I wanted to make sure that, we weren't going to get into any subjects that he was uncomfortable with, and Gary's an open book, and those are the kind of interviewees that all of us really appreciate. And nothing salacious, but just wanted to know. He's had a fascinating career. I can't wait to talk to him more about part two, but for now, here's part one of my talk with Gary Conway on Word Balloon.
I come from radio, so I have no trouble projecting my voice. I'm a Chicago CBS radio.
Remind me later, because I have an interesting story about radio.
Oh, please.
To comment on.
It would be wonderful. I appreciate that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it has had a huge impact on my life, and I'll explain it. But we must talk about it because most people don't know radio. We know it in our cars, but actually it's just I listen to stuff that's really on TV, like CNN or MSNBC. That's what radio has become.
And that's why I'm glad I am podcasting online, because it takes advantage of things that audio can do that radio doesn't have the time for. You got to break every 6 minutes for commercials. 30 years in Chicago radio, sir. Believe me, I know.
Yeah, and this whole culture of podcasts, what you're doing, has opened up opportunities and awareness that we didn't probably even think possible a while back. And
so agree.
It's now almost taken over the podcast.
I so agree, sir. You're right, because you can listen at your convenience. Right. And again, the different things that podcasting can do that radio can't. And also it's cheaper to produce. I mean, it's ridiculous. So,
and you have a better choice of listening to people that you really actually want to listen to, because what we have to do now when we turn on CNN or whatever is we're listening to the same broadcasts as we've heard them endlessly for the previous months, if not years. And I think we know what they're all about or saying. There's nothing. I still watch them only. By the way, in my case, I don't watch entertainment on TV. I can't even find it anymore.
Interesting. Well, I find I'm watching more streaming shows that are online versus what the networks are giving us. And God, local television is horrible. So I do understand.
It's even, they can't even figure out how to do an interesting weathercast.
I don't disagree. That's fantastic. Well, honestly, there are so many subjects I do want to talk about with you. I hope that we'll have enough time to cover the things that we want to talk about.
Well, I have days available for me.
Oh, that's great.
All the forthcoming days.
So that's great.
It's the night. I don't like to work during the nights, that's all.
I understand, sir. No, and I work from home, so it's really easy for me to schedule this during the day. You'll forgive me, sir. I'm 50. I'm about to be 58. You sound amazing. I mean, you sound terrific. So forgive me for...
I'll tell you, that's an interesting comment, and I take it to heart, and I'm glad, because so many people who were a bit heroic to me in life, and I'm going to tell you, Bill Clinton is a good example of that. I was a huge fan of Bill Clinton and the way he carried himself and the way he spoke and everything else. But if you listen to Bill Clinton now, his voice is way up here somewhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are like that. And I often wonder if just somebody can't get a hold of them. And there's a lot of ex-actors around who are looking for work who probably would be very good with those people to get their voice back into
interesting shape. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I voted for Clinton both times too, and despite some of his personal issues, I'm still a fan of his as a president, and so what are you going to do?
A marvelous president at a crucial time.
Indeed,
a crucial time, and he had his, to overcome what he had. Oh my God, we could do a separate podcast on that.
Well, we'll leave that off the record, sir.
Right.
If you're ready, we'll start. I'll give you a proper introduction.
Oh, we haven't started already? Okay, good.
Oh, well, I didn't want to presume that what we've been talking about is if you're okay with whatever we spoke about. If you don't want to talk about Clinton, that's fine. But what you said about television and radio,
I'll talk about anything.
Okay, sir. All right, great. If it's all on the record, I'll be happy to use it.
My favorite subjects are X-rated subjects. Just don't.
Well, we'll get into Playgirl, which was a very interesting note for you, and I'm glad it sounds like that's fair game as well. So that's terrific.
Right.
Okay.
I have to make up a story for that. Okay.
Well, think about that in the back of your head as we're talking.
Okay.
But all right, we'll begin. Gary Conway, thank you so much. Welcome to Word Balloon. I'm a longtime fan. I was a kid watching Land of the Giants, I think mostly in reruns, although not too long after it had gone off to ABC. And Burke I discovered about 20 years ago, and I've really enjoyed that. And not to mention the movies. I mean, we're going to talk about everything. But thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
My pleasure. You do an incredible job. And I'm looking forward to participating. It'll be another brilliant podcast. Not because of me, but because of you.
You're very kind. Well, the inspiration for reaching out and speaking to you is because Alex Ross, in his Fantastic Four Full Circle graphic novel, used you as the model for Mr. Fantastic. That's amazing.
Well, he explains it a lot. There's been in several articles, and it came on me quite suddenly, because what happened is when he did those drawings, and it became obvious that it was my face and figure. And as a matter of fact, later on I learned that he did a sculpture of me. And so when he was doing drawings, he would put the sculpture, different lights and so on, and that's why he could get the variation. But in several articles, and then later on in conversation with him directly and with his agent, I got to learn about the whole evolution of that. It was fascinating that he found something in me, and also Deanna Lund, by the way. I don't want to leave her out, because she was like the co-star there in Land of the Giants, and was his heroine for the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
And I learned about the Fantastic Four, as I said, the Fantastic Four almost after the fact, that he had long before had made his decisions about that. and then the way I learned about it, really to begin with, was that I kept, if I even went to my website or somebody else's, there were hundreds of, sometimes thousands of people who say, no, Reed Richards, that's Gary Conway. That's Gary Conway. And what the hell is going on with this thing? I mean, and if you ever look it up, every single person I ever heard, saw, read, commenting on that, all said the same thing. They all picked up on that, which I found remarkable, frankly.
Well, what I find interesting, and it didn't occur to me until Alex told me this, was, it's true, sir, you have a Jack Kirby face, the Marvel creator. And it's so much in your eyes and everything. I mean, you've got these great, good-looking leading man looks, but it never occurred to me. And it's like, oh, my God, Gary Conway could be a Jack Kirby character. Another contemporary of yours, maybe a little older, was Patrick McGowan. I also felt had a very Jack Kirby face. But had others ever commented? I would imagine you've done your share of monster conventions with,
over the years, I went through many. If they did or people did, I was not all that aware of it at that point. I've become aware of it, of course, lately in a big way. And what's gone on is people come out and make a big deal of it now, because it is because of Alex Ross. He brought that whole genre into a whole new dimension with his art. My God, nobody, even Jack Kirby or people before, I don't think no one has ever been like Alex Ross as an artist, and what he has done, what he's drawn, what he's painted, however he does it, that's remarkable. I've tried to find out how he does it, but he doesn't really explain it. And even just recently, I mean, within days, there's another poster, Fantastic Four. It's just brilliant. I have it, as a matter of fact, on my website. People, what happens, they find it and they send it to me. And it's so public in that sense. And it does hit hundreds, thousands, I think millions of people when you think about it. And the fact that I can get all the advantages of people getting something out of it, commenting. And as I said, what I love about it is I don't have to be in a TV show. I don't have to go there every single morning. I don't have to get into makeup. I don't have to film for 12 hours. This is all free time. I get all the advantages, and I don't lift a finger.
And this is essentially your Marvel movie when you think about it.
Yeah. No, by the way, it was a wonderful interview of Alex Ross. He gave it, and he talked a lot about it, and myself at the beginning of that. And I've listened to that at least a couple of times because it was, in many ways, a revelation. But it was a beautiful interview you had of him all the way through.
Well, you're very kind. I really, it always pleases me to hear that, especially when I have a first-time guest on, that they've listened to the show. So thank you so much. And again, it's mutual admiration, sir, because I've enjoyed your work. I saw I Was a Teenage Frankenstein and How to Make a Monster, not realizing this was the Land of the Giants guy years earlier. That's great. Oh, my God.
I did Teenage Frankenstein, by the way, when I went to UCLA. And I did it. No actor normally, I don't know, they would have thought twice about doing something like that. But when it came to me, the project came to me, I was a slaving student at UCLA, and I was working as almost the same thing as a bouncer in a way.
Okay.
And suddenly this project came at that time, and it paid money. And so what was I going to do? No. But you know what I did? I hate to tell you. I actually, at that point, changed my name. That's why I became Gary Conway, because I was a very serious art student. I was sort of going to change my name anyway as an actor, but that really what brought it about. Because I thought, well, I'll do this. See, I had an attitude, it was something like a porno film.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be associated with it.
Sure.
And so, and as a serious art student, I could just imagine going to art class at UCLA, and they were all very serious too. And they said, "Oh my God, is this Teenage Frankenstein? Is he late for class? Is he going to be drawing with us today?" So I didn't want to have an association. So I thought I would. That this Teenage Frankenstein would be playing in theaters way the hell somewhere else. And so one day, driving to UCLA, I think it's called the Crest Theater, and it's right next to Wilshire Boulevard. It's the theater that everybody sees going to UCLA, and on the damn banners, bigger than life was, "I was a Teenage Frankenstein." So all the hiding, name changing, diving and ducking was out the window. There's no way. And you see, if you go to UCLA and you're an art major, you want to be a serious guy, because the professors are all serious. You can't be known to be Teenage Frankenstein. It's just never going to work.
That's incredible. Am I right? This movie was really kind of rushed through production-wise because of the success of Michael Landon's I Was a Teenage Werewolf.
Right, and that was a successful film. And you remember also, that film was produced by that company that was new in the game. And before that, all the films you ever went to see in the theater were produced by 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, and so on. And this film had none of that and didn't have that kind of backing or background, but it blew everybody away. In fact, somebody sent me, interesting enough, maybe a year or two ago, a picture that was in their town, and it was a picture of this theater, and there was lines around the entire, and it showed the whole block, around the entire block, and on it was, "I Was a Teenage Frankenstein."
I appreciate it in terms of being a horror exploitation movie.
Right.
That's a fun genre, and certainly American International Pictures.
AIP, they did it. Yeah,
They made a meal out of that.
Their name. Yeah. They that brought them right up front and made a big deal of it. And also it inspired later on so many other. That was really the beginning in many ways of the independent film too.
Agreed. Absolutely, sir. And I even they make T-shirts these days. I have an American International logo T-shirt because, I mean, between the horror movies and those Frankie Avalon and Ed Funicello Beach movies and the Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe movies, it's a fun company. It's a very fun company.
Right.
Yeah.
When you think about in relationship what they were doing in Hollywood then, which was very really not creative. It was copying each other. They were not. That was not an exciting time for studio filmmaking, and so this all came about, and in many ways it dominated the box office going, especially for the young folk who dominate the box office, as we know today more than ever. But they were important, but they were not being fulfilled by the studio. So it was AIP that came up with all these movies that they all loved and went to see.
Yeah, the 50s was really, it seems, reading David Halberstam's book about the decade, that's really when a lot of the creative companies were like, hey, wait a minute, we're not really catering to teenagers, and they now have buying power in a way maybe they didn't in the, pre-war and World War II years.
Well, nowadays the studios don't even make the films anymore for adults.
Exactly.
They all their films, they had it as their films are made for 19-year-old boys.
Yeah.
That's their audience as far as they're concerned. And we all have to be somehow part of that cycle if we enjoy any aspect of it. But again, when we were doing those films at that time, that audience wasn't ever a part of the equation. And it came later with AIP and other companies a little bit like that. And then, what's interesting too, and it's always been significant for me in terms of the real independent film, when that came about, the independent film, the creative, artistic independent film. And that came about, I think, and you probably will know better, I associate it with roughly around 1970 when I was actually doing Land of the Giants. And I believe the very first film was brought about by hoodlum priest Don Murray. That was really, truly an independent film. Had nothing to do with the studios. Then shortly after, you had John Cassavetes, who did about 10 to 12. And in Burke's Law, I got to know him very well. And he changed in many ways the whole film business then during that period of time.
Agreed.
And what we had is this whole idea of the independent film. And then the 70s, I think, was the most brilliant period for the independent films. But it was really Don Murray and Cassavetes that launched all that. And today we really don't have much thought about that anymore. We just think all of that is one large or one big adventure. But no, it was quite different. And what they were doing at that time was a whole new thing and a great departure.
There are a couple current studios that actually are in the horror business, A24 and Blumhouse in particular, that I think reflect that attitude. They might have a little more money than Cassavetes or, as you said, too, the Don Murray, the Priest film that's to work with. But no, again, sir, no, I'm a big old movie fan, and it's been fun to discover that period of independence.
Being a fan, and I'd love to have your opinion, didn't you think and there were so many, I can't even remember all their names, the people who came, but that 70s was a great independent film revolution of this country. That's really when it occurred. The films of character, and there's a whole list of directors and producers that suddenly came, and if one if one is really going to study that, that's the period, I believe, that came about. And what happened, it died, I believe, after that. And the reason it died is that the studios essentially took over in the 80s. And in this way, it was the first time the studios brought about, right at the year, the idea that you advertise nationally.
Yes.
And before that, and I'm trying to remember the producer in the film that made that happen. Before that, there was no such thing as a national advertising. It was area to area in the country. Because I remember even doing The Farmer, a film I did at Columbia, and you started, and you had to earn your way around the country. And Farmer broke all records in Detroit, where it began, and then, therefore, it could go to other areas of the country and do very well. But there was no national distribution at that time.
Agreed. Yeah, I've lived in Chicago all my life, and I do remember that period, as you say, where it went from city to city, and movies would kind of build momentum. And also, as I'm sure you're aware,
by the way, one other thing, let me add. Not only going to city, but since you left the one area, and you went to the next area. In the case of The Farmer, they even changed the title.
Really? What else was it known as?
It was called. It went from The Farmer. Oh my God, what's the name of that? It'll come to me. It was a crazy title, but they knew they were going to some area in the South, and they wanted to have a more a title that would excite some of these farmer types, I guess, real farmer types down there. But because it was a different world going from area to area. Once you left Detroit or Chicago, areas like that, and you had to go to other parts of the country, it was a completely different distribution setup then. Different people were involved, and as I said, in our case of The Farmer, they literally changed the title for another, so there would be more success. And not only did they change the title, they changed the whole the one sheet. The one sheet, that was a whole different one sheet.
Wow.
Because they going from one to the other was a big deal, and it was a completely different distribution challenge and distribution process.
It's kind of ironic because that was released in 1977, and as you say, the movie business changed. As a nerd, I'm almost embarrassed because, yes, Star Wars kind of changed the imperative to make big blockbuster movies,
right?
And Jaws certainly as well, rather than the cool, independent, small but important stories that films like The Farmer represent.
And by the way, I remember so well how that all evolved. When I was going to UCLA, and there was a film school then, believe it or not, and I was an art student, but I took some courses in theater and what have you. Everybody did, and we all went. There was one theater on Vermont Boulevard, and that was a theater that any serious student or anybody serious at UCLA in terms of film went to this one theater, and that theater played no films that were coming out of Hollywood. At that point, they were playing mainly foreign films. That's when I saw my first incredible Italian films. There was a period of time when those Italian films were more than brilliant, like Bicycle Thief. Never been a film as great as that. And films coming out of the Soviet Union that were incredible. So you went to this one theater to see them, but you had to be hip to the whole idea and know what was going on. I remember the one theater, it was called, Ballad of a Soldier. Phenomenal film. But it all came during that period, and they would show it in this one theater, and it was definitely, it was the kind of place that you had to be a huge film buff aficionado and probably going to a university at that time to enjoy it and to be aware what was going on. But it was, I'll tell you, I don't get any of the feeling today as I got at that time, going to a theater and seeing some of those incredible films made. And so many countries in the world were participating, Italy especially. And it seems that that kind of exciting film and new film, I haven't seen an Italian film in years and years and years at that time. And that has all changed. As a matter of fact, I don't even watch much today in the way of film. Well, first of all, we have to blame a little bit the COVID thing over the last 3 years.
Certainly.
Staying out of theaters. And then there's only so much you want to be dealing with your TV set, right?
I hear you. You know, it's interesting, though. I do think especially the Korean film and television market is getting an awareness, and that's great, much like the Italian and French and Spanish markets did, in these times that we're talking about. So
yeah, I'm not aware of that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
You find that, yeah.
So, I mean, even, the Korean film, and the name escapes me right now, but it won Best Picture, whereas, previous years, it would only be up for Best Foreign Film. So, but I understand, and I'm so with you on, unfortunately, COVID accelerated what I think was already happening in the movie business in terms of the comfort of watching film from your TV. And do you need to see a small picture, an emotional picture rather than a spectacle? Do you need to see it on a 20-foot screen? I appreciate the theater-going experience, but I also understand the convenience. And again, I just think COVID accelerated that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. It's we've had to go through this transition. I have a big, beautiful TV screen, literally in my living room. I have actually two living rooms, and there it is. I'm watching the world through that, and it's a big screen, and it brings you in. Does it mean that I enjoy less going to the theater? I can't even answer that question because we weren't going to the theater, motion picture theater, because of COVID. And I think before that, I was compelled to go to the theater to have anything that I would call a film experience, frankly. And
understood.
If you could go on and say, having actually done theater and plays, it's a whole different thing going to see a play for real than to see a play on the TV screen, which I have on occasion. And to me, it just doesn't wrap me. It doesn't get me involved. And so I don't know. Maybe these things, maybe for all time, have to be seen. Like seeing art. You cannot see painting correctly over my TV.
True.
I have to go, if I want to see an artist, to the gallery and see the painting directly. And that's the way it's been for thousands of years. And hopefully it'll be that way for the next thousands of years. There's no substitute. And to me, there's really no for me personally, there's no substitute. And in my own sense of nostalgia, going to, when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, those periods, going to a movie, and I remember my dad would take me a lot, even during that period. That's when I remember in L.A., that was the time when there were you could go see independent films, or actually before that, see these brilliant foreign films. But so my association with that, and maybe not anymore today with most people, is you have to have that experience in the theater. But it's not. But that's not life anymore.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you, sir. And I like the painting analogy. I get what you're saying, and I think if people think about it that way, they definitely could see that.
And music, by the way, the other analogy, all the art forms have the same analogy. I don't care how great the recording, and you're sitting there listening to the recording, it isn't sitting in front of the musicians.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely.
Thankfully for that, that's the way it's always been, from the Renaissance, from the Greeks. the Renaissance on. And none of us want that to ever change, do we? Do we all going to spend the rest of our cultural life and the life of mankind sitting in front of a big screen where you live and experiencing all the art forms that way? No, God, no.
Boy, that's a great left field question now. As a young man of the 50s and 60s, who were some of your bands? What kind of music did you listen to?
Well, you see, for me, I had an interesting evolution. I played the violin.
Okay.
And I was very, very good with the violin. Good enough so that when I was in junior high school, they chose me, one of, I believe, 4 students out of junior high school to play in the all-city high school orchestra. I ended up playing the Hollywood Bowl. So I was a very good musician, very good musician. And when you're playing classical music a couple hours, 3 hours every day, you love classical music. It's hard to get away from it.
Sure.
So when you say, well, who's my favorite? But I did it suddenly. It was in the 70s. I began listening to the original bebop, and I got to really. It started really with the rhythm and blues.
Okay.
I would only listen really to classical music, and then in L.A. we had a station, and suddenly there was this music called rhythm and blues. I loved it, and then that veered off into sort of a combination of country music and rhythm and blues, and there were some really marvelous performers at that time, and so I got to enjoy them. I don't know what's going on with music today.
Huh.
I feel often I'm in a cocoon with that stuff.
I
don't know who the real interesting singers and people are. Part of it's my fault because I just don't want to spend the time having to rethink, read through. I've had my period with music and art that I love, and I still enjoy the music to this day. So now why not listen to that music? So I'm getting more and more ignorant of what's going on, unfortunately.
That's all right. Again, radio is not helping you, sir. So I believe, as we were talking about earlier.
Okay, now I want to tell you about radio. Can I tell you about my radio story?
Absolutely.
So when I was growing up, and this is true, I think, of other people, I grew up in Boston, with an Italian, Sicilian family. My family all came from Sicily.
Oh, wow.
And so that was my whole experience. And I remember as a kid in Boston that there was in the living room, and it was sacrosanct, was the big RCA radio. It was taller than I was. It was bigger than I was as a kid. And it sat there in the middle of the living room. And I remember my granduncle and my grandfather passed away during that time, so I had very little experience. He was a marvelous, marvelous person. And I have to this day this imagery of my granduncle Luigi and his wife Signorina sitting there next to this large RCA radio, and their ear was pressed right against the radio, and they were listening to the Metropolitan Opera.
Sure.
And I'd come in the room, and as they had their ears pressed, they were singing along with it.
Wow.
La Donna Mo, and they were singing right along. And so that's how I was introduced to music in terms of outside of actual performing. And funny, and that radio was so important. That was a big RCA radio, that when my parents and family all decided they had enough of Boston, they all came from immigrant parents, all came to Boston, and they all wanted to move to California, because California to them was Sicily.
Interesting.
And so when we moved across, and I'm talking in the period where I'm about 7 or 8 years old, my sister was 3 or 4, and we packed into my Mom and Dad's car, which at that point still had tires that were before the war, so they had to be what they call there was the kind of tire where there was not a real tire anymore, and you had to have, if you're going to go cross country, you had to have two cars because one car would always break down.
Wow.
And that one would then go across. But I remember that radio was so important to my mom that when we went cross country, they packed enough clothes to put in the back, and I was sitting in the back seat with myself, my sister, my aunt, whose husband had just was going into the war.
Wow.
Sadly, and I remember to this day. So she had her son back there. It was a small child, a baby at the time. So there were four human beings in the back seat, and one huge RCA Victor radio that took up the entire back floor. And to sit in front of it, you couldn't put your legs down. And that, because my mother, there was no way they were going to leave that radio behind. They would leave anything, but not that damn radio.
Wow. Yeah, that's
how important the radio was.
I so understand, sir. I had older relatives as well, and have seen those giant, the consoles, but even the independent radios that were like furniture, as big as you say, as big as a credenza or a hutch.
I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, can I here? Well, because honestly, all this is great, and really, I love the background on this. But so between the monster movies and let's say Burke's Law, were you ever under contract? Because I saw.
Yes, I was under contract to Warner Brothers.
I figured as much. Go on, please.
And Warner Brothers at that time, they made everything. Everything.
Yeah.
They invented television, really, the series. It was Warner Brothers, and nobody else was. I think a little bit slightly later, Universal started doing a series or two. But at one point, every damn show on TV was coming out of Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
the Strip, Hawaiian High, you name it. Warner Brothers ran the show, and they had, of course, all these actors they were working with. Anybody at that period that was workable, was there, and they were. In my case, and I remember the very day I went in to see them, and in fact, I wasn't even out of the Army at that point. My agent said, "You have to come in. You got to see these people. They'll like you." And I was sitting there in the other room, waiting on my interview with Hugh Benson and the other fellow. They ran the show.
Was it William Orr?
Yes, Bill Orr.
Okay.
Bill Orr and Hugh Benson. And so, again, I got this leave from the Army, but I hadn't left the Army. But this agent brought me in there, and I was sitting there in the outer office waiting to go see the guys. And I was sitting there, and that was my initial experience. And Bob Conrad, who I never heard of, never knew, was the other guy waiting to see them. So I learned later, when Bob Conrad went in to see them, that's where he got the show at Warner's to do that original show he did.
Hawaiian Eye, am I right?
Hawaiian Eye, that's where Hawaiian Eye came from.
Yep.
And then I think he did another one after that. But also in my case, they know I had to go back in the Army, and they said, well, when you come out, I think we'll want to put you to work here. And I came out of the Army. I went right there to work for Warner Brothers as a player.
Uh-huh.
And during that period of time, the whole idea of it was that eventually you would get into do one of the series. So I think I was there for 2 years, a little over 2 years, and that came to an end. But I never actually ended up doing a series there. But I did all their shows, man, one after another.
Yeah.
And I did westerns, detective shows, and at that point, Warner Brothers, like Fox, maybe Warner still has it to a great extent, but they had fantastic backlots.
Yes.
So you could do the shows when in the morning you could be in the middle of Europe, and then in the afternoon you were in another part of the lot, and you were in some Arab country, and then you were somewhere else in Hawaii. I mean, they had these. They don't have. I don't think have that anymore. I remember when Fox. Since you come to L.A., you've ever been to L.A. recently?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, then you know what Century City's like.
Yes, sir. I actually did a TV show at the Sony lot for them. So yeah,
Century City was the back lot of 20th Century Fox.
Oh, Fox, of course. Yes, indeed.
And that's how, when I was first introduced to Fox, I went there, and you went in the back lot. There was no sense going to Europe after that because you saw everything there.
And the Fox Ranch as well, where they not only shot up all the westerns, but MASH, I know, all the outside scenes were on the Fox Ranch.
But wasn't it amazing when you think back of that culture and to have the endless financial support to be able to build things like that and do things. And there was not really TV at that point that made those studios come about. Those were all the films they were making during that period of time. And fortunately, for them, everybody went to movies.
Of course, yeah. Well, radio and movies. Those were the two, entertainment sources. And I know, MGM, even in the height of the Depression, was releasing a movie a week.
Isn't that amazing when you think about it, right?
Yeah. No,
one of the purposes of the movie then, and I've thought about this very recently when I read a letter from I have a dear, marvelous uncle. His name was Celestino Otero. And he was drafted or went in the Army right away and went off to the Philippines. And how I know, I was reading a letter to his wife, who's my aunt. It was such a beautiful and in many ways very sad letter, how they had lived then, because they never knew if they were going to make it the following day. And when we first came across the country, my family, we brought my aunt there, and she had to say goodbye to him. Can you imagine what that was like? And she, at that point when we got to L.A., she'd go to a theater 2 or 3 times a week, because only in the theater that she knew what was maybe where her husband could possibly be, because they worshiped the newsreels. He went to the theater then mainly for the newsreels.
Wow.
Because there were a lot of women, I mean, in the millions, who were in the family wondering, because we didn't have the newsreel then on TV.
Right.
To know what was going on. So they, sitting there worrying all day long about their husband, their father, their mother, whomever, who was in the Philippines, who was in all kinds of parts of Asia and China at that part, let alone all of Europe. And they knew nothing. You didn't turn on TV. There were no newsreels. And so they got all, that's why people flocked to the theater then. It was not just for the movies, it was for the newsreels.
I so hear you, sir, and absolutely. In fact, I've been reading about the beginnings of NBC News and how initially they were going to the newsreel sources for their foreign footage and even domestic footage, and just that transition before they created their own news bureaus and were able to do what newsreels did for decades, going back to the silent era. I mean, it was a different world. Absolutely, sir. So can I ask you regarding Warner Brothers, and I don't mean to get personal, but do you remember that studio contract? As you say, you were kind of a feature player moving from show to show, guest shots. Like, how much money were you making a week?
That's an interesting question. At the time, coming out of the Army, what the contract I signed was, boy, it is a great amount of money, but it was crap. It was maybe at that time I'm going to say $300 a week.
Sure.
Can you imagine?
Well, yeah, I can, because I've heard even James Garner, when Maverick hit, he was stuck in that kind of featured player contract.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you were stuck. And so actors that time were making no money. Later on, when I was to read how some, and I guess to this day, some actor was doing a TV show, and they were making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And it was a TV show with 20 episodes. Oh no, it was I'll tell you, and where that all changed, of course, is because when we were doing a series at Warner Brothers at that point, it played one time. It was the initial playing. Then it had the summer rerun. Then you never saw it again.
Yes.
That's the only income they had. And then suddenly we had what was essentially the internet, and they began to be able to sell all over the world. And I remember it very specifically. At one point when we were first making those series like a Warner Brothers, we never heard of anything being sold. It was not a concept. And then I remember having a specific talk out of the blue with this one guy who I ran into when I was doing some filming of stuff. And he specifically had come from the country, and he was telling me at that time there were 30, and it happened overnight, 30,000 stations suddenly around the world that were available. And so when you did selling a TV show, it wasn't just, but you got that one show and then the rerun, which was very little. It was playing now, especially as an American show, unlike any other country. It was playing all over the world. And that's when everything changed dramatically.
Did you get compensation for those foreign runs of shows?
Not really. The guild was late in the game and all that.
Yeah.
And so many of those deals are made. And the actors never really get properly.
No.
In fact, it was embarrassing. The deals that were made were pathetic. I mean, I get to this day residuals 65 cents.
Yeah.
$1.50. I still get residuals like that.
Oh, I believe it, sir. Yes, I've heard that. I've heard that story from actors of your generation, and even
as a matter of fact, right now I'm looking. I swear to you, on my desk, I'm looking at a pile, and it may be 10 or 15 so-called residuals. And I don't bother. It's not worth going to the bank or anything. And let me see if I have one here. Yeah. To this day.
Oh, I believe it, sir.
They're embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm telling you about it because, fortunately, no one's going to listen to this, right? So I can tell them.
It's just you and I, Gary. Absolutely.
That's what you promised.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say, I hope you have a stamp or something, because you can get carpal tunnel syndrome.
So if you ever get depressed about anything economic, you call me up, and then I'll read you off these residuals.
Well, and I later I want to talk about the winery, because that's amazing. That's amazing. But the way that happened, there'll never be. I created that. The wine business, as we know about it, I created. And that happened. Wow.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. I didn't create it because I knew what I was doing, or I had some inner direction that came from the above. I crash landed. What happened was I was living in L.A. at the time. This is well over 40 years ago now, 45 years ago. I was living in L.A. at the time, and it was hopelessly smoggy there.
Sure.
That's one thing I've always in my life. I always liked to have clean air. Isn't that odd?
Not at all. Thank God.
I thought it was odd. And so I remember one guy, I was on the set, actually at Burke's Law, believe it or not. And we'd go out, and the smog was horrible in L.A. at that point. And you get in it, and you could feel it for the rest of the day. And if you love sports like I did, and I do every kind of touch football or anything, you couldn't do it for very long.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so I remember I was talking about this. It was on the set of Burke's Law. And one of the actors there, a good friend of mine, who come in and do little bit parts now and then, I'm saying, have you been out today? I wouldn't even want to go outside. He says, it's awful. And he says, you know something? He says, you got to come up. And I said, I got to go somewhere and breathe. He said, you got to come up to Paso Robles. That's, by the way, where I'm calling from. That's where I live.
Okay.
He said, you got to go up to this town, Paso Robles. And he said, because it's got beautiful, clean air. And I said, well, that's for me. So we made an arrangement right then. And we said, well, let's do a couple actors. He had a ranch. We'll go up there. We'll play cowboy and Indian, whatever we want to do. It'll be fun. So we all drove up the coast, and I came to this town called Paso Robles, which the cleanest air, to this day, actually, it's the same way. And after we spent the weekend, and a lot of people aren't this nuts about things, but I was. And after being able to go out and swim and horseback ride, and I come back and my lungs felt beautiful all the way down. And Paso Robles, are you aware of Paso Robles? It's halfway between L.A. and San Francisco.
Okay.
Right there on the coast, basically, 101. And on the way down, as I was driving back from that experience, my wife, Marion, of course, was in the car with me. And I said, you know something, Marion? This is out of the blue. I said, we're going to buy a place up there. I got to go up there.
Wow.
And so within about 2 weeks, I got in touch with my friend. And he advised me to go up. He advised me on this real estate guy, and I made an appointment with him, calling him up, and we went up there, and I got to he had actually a beautiful house more on the west side of Paso Robles. And when I got in his house, I was this eager guy from L.A. and said, gee, if you could find me, I want a place up here, second home. I said, this way I can get away from L.A. And I went on and on and on and on. He said, okay. He said, I got the perfect place for you. And I've got to show it to you right now. It just got on the market. Later on, I learned it just got on the market. The place belonged to a pioneer family, and they had bought it 150 years before. So
wow.
It's just getting on the market with 150-year wait. So anyway, I go down to the real estate, his garage. I thought we were going to jump into, usually the real estate people had Cadillacs. I was looking around for the Cadillac. and he said, no, he points to this helicopter.
Wow.
I thought, oh, God. I said, see, I'm thinking in L.A., you buy a lot. Usually you buy a lot if you have a home. That's like 50 by 100, 150, maybe 200 by 200.
Sure.
You never buy, in the city where I was, Santa Monica, buying an acre was prohibitive, and it probably didn't exist. And so I thought an acre up there made sense. So I'm thinking acre in my head. Anyway, so we jump in this helicopter, and as we lift up, you've never been, I don't think, here in this area, but it's a phenomenally beautiful area. The Big Sur area, the hills and the mountains, and you look out over the sea. It's just incredibly picturesque, and that's what we did. And as we lifted up, I got mesmerized by what I was looking at. And we went over a few hills and mountains and things. And suddenly we come to this beautiful valley, and I'm looking down at it. And then he says, this is it. So I'm looking at this valley, and I'm trying to figure, where's this acre he's talking about? And I said, this is it. So what's the land? He said, it's 320 acres. I'm looking for an acre, And suddenly he's telling me it's 320 acres.
Wow.
And I didn't even want to do the math at that point. I'm thinking, wait a minute. And just as he's saying that, and I'm falling in love with what I'm looking at, I'm thinking, my God, if there's any way I could get anything in this beautiful valley, he hits a high tension or an explosion, and the helicopter goes crashing down.
Oh, my God.
And I'm in it.
Oh, my God.
And so we crashed and should have died, been killed. It was a terrible crash. Totally destroyed the helicopter. Somehow I walked out of it. Don't ask me how and why.
Jeez.
And the old farmer, his house was come running up the hill, wondering what the hell was going on. And he finally drove us to where my wife was waiting at the real estate guy. His name was Archie Hansen. His wife was there too. And when the farmer drove us back, it was 2 hours later, and my wife was frightened as hell because she knew something had gone wrong, because it was almost dark by that time. And the helicopter was supposed to come right back to the property there of Archie Hansen. Now, as I came in the door of Archie's house, and Mary looked at me thinking, she didn't know what in the hell the story was. And I'm elated to her. I said, I saw the most beautiful property, and we're going to buy it, Marion. I thought I was dead, and suddenly I'm doing that. And I ended up buying it, and and I'm the first. And as time went on, and we had this property, then I became a cattleman for a while. Then I became a farmer for a while. And then one day my wife, who was a Miss America when she went to Europe as Miss America, and she'd come from Manning, South Carolina, never had a drink, but she was in France, in Paris, and some of the people brought her out and introduced her to this phenomenal wine, like a Romani Conti, some wines like that. She said, well, I think I've been missing something most of my life. And she became quite the wine aficionado. And so when we, after the crash landing, said, I'm going to buy this place, it was, at first, as I said, I just had to carry on what the farmer did before. But with Marion's inspiration and my own, I said, we're going to plant a vine here. And we are the first people to plant a vine in this whole entire area. And this area has now become the number one in the world as far as viticulture. There are now 400 wineries.
Amazing.
And it's recognized everywhere as being the most premium of all areas, beating anything that's even close in France, although that's all now the past because of global warming and other reasons. And all that started because, as I said, I planted the very first vine.
That's amazing. And I want to acknowledge your wife, Marion McKnight, Miss America 1957. That's amazing. And I'm looking at her Wikipedia page as we're speaking right now. That's fantastic, man. And truly,
a beautiful woman, by the way. And
well, and that's wonderful. You guys are still together. That's terrific.
Yeah, that's the most important thing of all this. Yeah,
absolutely, unbelievable, man. So again, I'm so thrilled that this happened for you because, as you know, so many actors after their working career in movies and TV and stuff, you hear all the hardships and everything. So it's so wonderful that you got this land when you did, and then got in the wine business and are enjoying the success of that. Wonderful, wonderful to hear.
And in all my life, I've been a painter. That's primarily who I am, what I am. And what's beautiful about, and even the wine, making great wines, and everything to do with art, is I'm doing my best work now as an artist by far. I started painting when I'm 4 and a half, 5 years old. I had 4 scholarships by the time I was 12 at top schools. I was an art major at UCLA. So I spent all my life in art. I'm painting now. That's what's so important about creativity. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is more wonderful than his First Symphony. Mozart's 40th Symphony is better than his 3rd Symphony.
Yep.
And so one thing about art is that artists they're not like athletes. They don't get bad as time goes on, or worse. They get better. And so I sensed that early on. I said, if I want to spend my life doing something, I want to get better at it.
I'm nodding, sir. I so agree with you. I remember Orson Welles in his interview with Peter Bogdanovich talking about composers who were doing their best work in their 80s and 90s.
Yes.
And, so no, I subscribe to that. I hope to, as in my humble endeavor of podcasting and interviewing, that I have that opportunity as I get older, and I feel a lot better.
Aren't you 90 years old now?
I'm a 90-year-old trapped in a. I'm a 90-year-old trapped in a. Yeah, I'm trapped in a 57-year-old body, but no, I'm definitely. Again, I grew up in that 4 or 5 channel television world and saw so many movies on Saturday and Sunday winter afternoons here in Chicago when the weather was bad. But that's great because it just allowed me to enjoy so many great things from earlier decades. And yeah, that love has never ended, and I keep discovering more great movies. And
by the way, you also, when it's an important part to know that when you're, as I said, we really initiated this whole area, and early on, and then what happened? Justin Baldwin and the Resnick now own the Justin next door.
Okay,
the biggest people in all agriculture. So that's all changed dramatically from the days when. See how things proceed from the little winemaking and the vineyard, the estate vineyard and all that. That all changed. But the early part of it was after crash landing, buying the land, and then figuring, hell, that's what we should be doing. We're no good. We're just Hollywood cattle guys. We're bad at this. But let's do something we could possibly be good at. And my wife suggests we might be good at because it takes a certain amount of sophistication, education to have a wonderful vineyard and especially to make wine. So anyway, that's why we followed that course. And the first one's there. And the funny thing is I recall so vividly having, and you have to go through the growing the grape, and 5 years into growing the grape, you begin to harvest and pick some grapes. And early on, during one of our first harvests, I said, let's make some wine. Isn't that what it's all about at the end of the day? Let's make some wine. And we did. And I did it, as I mentioned, along with Justin. And then after we made the wine, about a month or two later, I took one of the bottles that we had it in a barrel. We tasted the wine. I said, this damn wine I think is good. And so I got carried away with it a little bit, thinking it was so good. And I decided, I'm going to take some of this wine down to a wine shop I knew in Santa Monica. And so I bottled up a few bottles and we traveled down to Santa Monica, which we did all the time. We still had our home there anyway. And I go into the wine shop, and the guy I kind of knew a little bit. I'd been there before. And he said, what do you have there? And I said, I got a bottle, I think, of something you're going to really, really enjoy. So I bring this bottle out, and he looks at it, and it's a label. I always did all my own labels, even. I started out doing it. And he looked at it again, turned it around a little bit, read the back label. And then he said, where's this from? And I said, Paso Robles. And he says, Paso Robles. It's like, where in the hell would anybody ever want to make wine from there? Of course, that has changed dramatically. And over the years, how dramatic that's been, because our vineyard has been so astounding. And I'll give you some indications. In the 40 years of the vineyard, we have never fertilized. That's how incredible it is here.
Wow.
Best climate in the world by far for growing the elite grapes. And and it's so amazing as far as the viticulture and agriculture that we've had over 2 decades, and this is a while back. Like finally came to an end. Over 300 of the top viticulturalists from all over the world come there to study. I went to as partly as a result of that and other things. I was invited to China a little while back.
Yep.
8 years ago, and I gave a grand speech to Beijing University at their biggest event, and part of that reason was their great worship of the wine, what we had done. But it was also, I learned later on, a lot to do with Land of the Giants. Most people don't realize that the Land of the Giants, I always want to mention this to people. The people have no idea because they see it here in one way, is the most popular television show ever produced from the amount of stations that have shown it in the world.
That's so great. Yeah.
And there's a good reason for that. I want to say it's not because of the acting. It's mainly because in Europe and all over the world where they don't necessarily understand English, because of Irwin Allen, it was a very visual film. Because remember, most TV at that point were in the living room or in the kitchen. They were talking, and very limited as far as production. But Land of the Giants was huge. In fact, it was the most expensive show production-wise ever done, and it started there. So people in Yugoslavia, when they were turning on TV, they didn't just want to see some little American show that was taking place in the living room.
Sure.
Humor, they didn't understand. So they saw it, and they got Land of the Giants. They understood Land of the Giants. They loved Land of the Giants. And partly because Land of the Giants was about the little guy against the big guy. The big guy represented that government.
Absolutely.
They were the little guy, and they identified with it. I was told this again and again. It was amazing how that show resonated. It's like Gulliver's Travels, based, as you well know, on Gulliver's Travels, which was Thomas Jefferson's favorite book. And it was the most important book maybe ever written for lots of reasons. And one of them was the symbolism of the little guy and the big guy, and that's what it had. And that's how it resonated. Because when you think, again, if you're in whatever country you're in, I remember particularly how in England, Land of the Giants was so popular because you sat there and you had a choice. You can watch Land of the Giants, or you want to watch some little show that took place in the living room that they had a laugh track, but you didn't find it funny because you didn't understand this kind of humor.
I absolutely, sir. No, the visuals of Land of the Giants. Hell, I remember not only watching the show, but it's funny in preparing to talk to you, that great image, and it is you and Dina Lund. Am I saying her first name right, or is it Deanna?
I'm sorry, what?
Ms. Lund. Is her first name Deanna or Dina?
Yeah, Deanna.
Deanna, okay. That great image, and I believe it's you when you're scotch taped to a desk. Am I right? Aren't you? Isn't that you?
I love that image because you know what I do? I just had to have a knee operation. It's the only thing I've ever really had in my life, and I'm going to have to get another one. And I want to send that image to my surgeon here because it's the perfect image. It's this giant scalpel coming down right on my knee.
Yep.
So I'm going to send it to after I have this little operation and saying, you see what? I had to deal with here before.
Well,
no, and by the way, Deanna was such a sweet girl. She's no longer with us and can't enjoy the idea that she's one of the fantastic girls. And
yes.
And she, again, Alex Ross talked about her uniqueness.
Oh, yeah.
Feature-wise. I wish you were here to enjoy that because she's the kind of person who would, very much so. And she she was a lovely, lovely lady, and you see, as you could think, the actors of that show, we were the most cohesive group of actors who ever lived. I remember a couple times early in production, I remember, since I was the captain, I had to kind of take a leadership. And one thing I said, we're going to be tied down here for God knows how long. And everything we did was practically in the set. Now, we could either drive ourselves crazy and go nuts and argue all day long, or we could have a wonderful time together. And I'm going to choose that we have a wonderful time together and a very respectful time. And we could all be about love and respect with each other. And, we had a group that adored each other.
That's great to hear. Absolutely, Mike. And again, this evolution of Irwin Allen shows, and I really think, you go back to Lost in Space and then, Time Tunnel, obviously, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. But I really think Land of the Giants was that culmination of the chemistry that I think he started to find with Lost in Space, built on it with Land of the Giants. And absolutely, man. I mean, I'm a huge fan of your cast. I mean, they're all great. Don Marshall, obviously, and Stephen Ingram, and of course Kurt Kasmar and Deanna and Heather as well. I had a massive crush on Deanna as a kid, and still do. I mean, what a lovely woman. Absolutely.
Oh, she was. Yeah, she was. And and it was a beautiful cast all the way around. Even I have to include myself. And what Irwin was able to do, when he put together a cast, it was universal. Like Deanna was loved and respected everywhere in the war, everywhere anybody ever talked to. She's a beautiful woman. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. I don't care what country you go to. And Don Marshall was a beautiful guy. Any country you talk to, and Don Matheson. When you think about it, and everyone in that cast, was well. I mean, I heard it a million times how they like the people so much, and part of it I want to reiterate because it is important. This was not true with other series, and you've heard all those stories, but that this cast loved each other, and we made a point of it, and we even stopped to talk about it, how much we loved each other, and that we were going to enjoy being with each other, even if we had to spend 14 hours that day together with nowhere to go. So that was a very important part of our ability to actually enjoy our time there that we had.
That's great to hear. And truly, again, I'm so bummed that it was only 2 seasons.
It was. We were actually a little over. We went over 2 seasons, more like 3. But the only reason it stopped, it was very popular and would have continued. Irwin Allen, here's the story behind it, but it was the most expensive show ever produced. It was very, very expensive. And Irwin Allen, he was all about production at the time, because if you think of, Lost in Space, you think of the shows he was doing. Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. They were all heavy production shows compared to everything else that was being done. That almost had no production. And he spent a lot of money on Land of the Giants. Again, the most expensive production. And he, at the end of, I think it was the second year, and it was doing very well, and it was going up, 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 up. And he went to ABC and he says, I know what happened. ABC came to him and actually wanted to cut the budget. Because at that point they didn't have Europe to sell it to, and they remember that was a time that it was still limited. And they said they were going to cut the budget, and Irwin Allen he said, I want to raise the budget.
Wow.
I said, and so there was this huge thing, and he couldn't. By the way, Irwin Allen's offices at that point were an entire huge, the biggest building on the 20th century lot, a whole building. And if you went to have an interview with Irwin, you went up to the 3rd floor, and you opened the door there, and there was this incredible table with 30 people sitting, and you come in and that was your interview. I mean, he was a major dude at that point as far as production goes, and he couldn't get them to put more money in. You know what he said? I'm finished.
Wow.
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing any more TV. It's over with. And he left television that he dominated. And that's when he began film, Poseidon Adventure and so on.
Sure.
It was over Land of the Giants.
Wow. Yeah, the disaster movies. My God, yes. I saw Poseidon Adventure in the theater when it was a brand new movie. That's one of my early movie memories was seeing that movie in the theater.
Right. And he did a bunch like that. And that's what he just stopped doing TV. He had enough of it. He wanted to do it in a way, and he was right, with production and with filmic quality and things that we would all respect and admire. He didn't want to just be doing the same old crummy production values again.
I understand.
But that's what changed. It was Land of the Giants that where because he could not get them, and again they were looking at what money they were going to make, and at that point the world had not opened up for them, but they could foresee the next couple of years that was going to become the most popular show ever. The amount of money that they would make from it was phenomenal compared to the budget, but that wasn't in existence when that decision had to be made.
Understood. Yeah, and it's a shame. You know, and this is kind of a fan kind of nerdy question, but were you all disappointed that you couldn't do a final episode of Getting Back to Earth, or whatever fate maybe was the ultimate plan? Was there an ultimate plan?
Not that I'm aware of. And interesting, there wasn't a sense, because when you did the show, even during the show, especially that show, you were pretty well convinced that you had the next season. And so we were very surprised when we were cut off because we were doing well. It's a popular show. I had gone, God almighty, how many events I had gone to, I think during the summer. I mean, I could go endless amount of events with people. And I remember at that period, I was going to do events where people, I remember in Atlanta, for some reason, there were one after, from PR. And I remember in Atlanta, 2 or 3 events there. Nothing. You couldn't imagine these series doing that today. And they had rented an entire, almost like a villa, and people came just for the autograph, and we're around the block waiting to get the autograph. And I remember going to another event where it was a theater, and the thing was overpacked, and they were showing in the cave, but they would end up doing a show, old films and TV I was in, and then as part of this event for people who came, there was a guy who was actually very good, who was dressed, who looked just like, he had the same hairdo I had, and he had the same red, and he came in and did this whole kind of dance thing, playing me on the stage while I was there.
It's fantastic. That's amazing.
Those are the days, man. I think they've gone. It'd be great if they return. I don't know.
Well, it's and I'm sure you're aware of, like, San Diego Comic-Con and obviously the monster conventions, that, there's definitely an audience for that. But I'm
going to that convention next week.
What are you going to?
I'm going to, I couldn't make the one, so we're going to the, I was talked into it. We're going to it's the Burbank, it's one in Burbank.
Okay.
That one there. Excuse me, years and years and years ago I went to it. We're going again. And it's funny how things happen. I went because my 2 co-stars were, including Stefan, were going to be there, and
oh, great!
They wanted to call it a reunion, and so I said, okay, I'll go. I just don't want to pick myself up. And then he calls me today, Steph, and says, I have this horrible ear thing. I'm not going to be able to go. He was almost crying. Yeah, so it started out, I went there because of my two cohorts. And anyway, you know how things happen.
Sure. Oh, my God. I'm really glad we're talking. I know you're coming off of a cold. And no,
really, I had a weirdly, and it started, it was, both my wife and I got the same thing, a little bit of our voices, we got a little bit slightly stuffy. It wasn't even a cold. It was strange. I never had a sore throat. I never even had much of a running nose.
Okay.
But we just had a slight congestion, which could be whatever. But, but it did affect your voice, and that's, I guess, one reason we didn't do this before.
Well, you sound great. We're almost at 90 minutes. I don't want to abuse the opportunity to talk to you, but there is so much more I still want to talk about. If you don't have the time today, I would love to pick this up, and because I still want to talk about Burke's Law and some of the other things I mentioned to you. Like,
whatever you want to do. As we've spoken that along, if we can continue later on, you just tell me the day, and as long as I'm going to be around, we can continue.
That again, it's your call. I don't, as I say, I just don't want to abuse the moment now.
We can go on today for a bit.
Okay, great.
I'm not going anywhere right now. So.
All right, very good. Again, I don't know what your day is like, and I totally understand if you had other things to do this afternoon. So this is great. I appreciate that.
The only thing I do, I have a wrestling bout coming up.
I wouldn't mess with you, Gary. So
I did in college.
That's great. Oh, that's terrific. You know, the Olympian Dan Gable?
Mm-hmm.
I had the pleasure of meeting him and being part of an interview. I did sports radio for 20 years and got to co-host a show with Dan and talk about his wrestling career.
Well, my wrestling career was very quick and brief, but when I went to UCLA, I was actually very young. I graduated fairly young, and I was not only young, but I'm one of those kind of people that actually mature much later in life. So I, more than anything on this earth, I wanted to play football in high school and do track and so on, but I was just too young and too little. And then literally on the year I graduated, I grew like crazy in 1 year. I got up to be 6'1". I was 190 pounds. I mean, I don't know. It's just, that's the way it happened.
Wow.
And I remember, so I didn't do a lot of the things athletically because I was just too young and I'm growing. So I remember going to UCLA, you had to take a little sport. So I took wrestling, and I was really, really good at it. And the coach, who was also head of the class, I remember one day he came to me and says, I have a lot of people I interview about wrestling, high school wrestlers and so on. And if you would do me a great favor, I'd love for you to wrestle with them. I think you're that good. And if they can get by you, I want to have them on the team. And so that's what I was. I was kind of an assistant wrestler, coming from no background. But at that point, I'd grown and gotten. And funny, that was actually right then too when I went in the Army.
Okay.
Fortunately, I'd grown, and I was pretty strong because in the Army, you could get picked on. They think you're small.
Oh, sure.
Weak, and they wouldn't. Nobody picked on me, so I got by. As a matter of fact, I got by so well that, and again, I didn't have that background because I was small. That toward the end of basic training at Fort Ord, the there were several companies that were going through at the same time.
Sure.
And at the end of it, the captain was the head of it. Said, we have at the end of basic training, we put all the companies together, and then we have a athletic contest. And whoever and this one, I was still had to be again in the Army for another 4 months or so. It happens at the beginning of his stint there.
Okay.
And then he announced. I thought to myself, well, screw it, who cares? And then he announced. He said, and anyone, whatever soldier, whatever guy here wins all these events, gets on the top, gets to have a 3-day pass.
Oh, geez.
At that point, I had just married my Miss America wife. And I just married her, and to say we were devoted to each other is an understatement. And that's why I had left and go in the Army. So the idea that I could see her sooner than I ever expected, I said, well, I'm going to enter this sucker. And I did. And I won it all.
That's great. Oh, my God. Did you have to wrestle? Did you have to box?
No. What we did was it was like the Olympics.
Oh.
We had to run. We had to do strength things. I remember at the bar we had to do pull-ups.
Okay.
I remember I did something like 25 pull-ups, and I remember the guy who was our head of suddenly took a liking to me because he thought I was trying to beat the system, get around it, and he got angry at me. I remember during the pull-ups, he held me down and kept making me do them over again. But I did, and I won. I mean, I was so anxious to get to see Marion, who I had just married,
That's
but had
great.
not seen.
Yeah, that's amazing. Outstanding. All right, you know something? I as you said, you're willing to go a couple more minutes. I will save my Burke's Law questions. If possible, would love to talk to you again and talk about the Burke's Law.
Please do, because we should go. It would be wonderful to talk to you and review. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Because I want to see if I have this here in front of me. Actually, in preparation, I wanted to go over. Oh yeah. The list. I could send it to you at some point of the incredible actors, one after the other, who work on Burke's Law.
Well, that's honestly, Gary, that is truly, and also more about Irwin Allen, and certainly more about Aaron Spelling, because obviously the two of them are such important figures in television, and also
they really are the two most important figures of television in that era. I mean, they did everything, and this was, as you know, it was Spelling's first show.
Yes.
And he turned out to be quite the producer, because he could talk. He called up all these people, and these were the great stars at the time.
Yes.
Talked him into coming in to do an episode or two. I mean, we had. I'm just looking here at a few of them. We had. It goes. It's endless. Burgess Meredith, Hoagie Carmichael, Roderick Crawford, Arlene Dahl, Carl Reiner, Cesar Romero, Janice Rule, Dick Clark, Edgar Bergen, Andy Devine, Virginia, Spike Jones, Gina Rollins, Jeannie Crane, Dorothy Lamour, Terry Thomas, McDonald Carey, Gloria Swanson, Telly Savalas. It's hundreds.
Well, and the great thing, and it happened on other shows like Kojak in the 70s and even Miami Vice in the 80s, but you would get actors on the way up and also actors that had been veterans.
This list, though, is an amazing list.
Yes.
And there, I don't think it has ever been even close to being duplicated. And at that time, they were all, most of them were pretty big stars. Remember, it was all about timing. A lot of these people had become very famous during film of the previous decade.
Yeah.
Then the film business, then now it was suddenly television. And Aaron Spelling just had this unique gift. He could call these people, and they all said, yeah, that would be a good idea. I think I'll come to do it. And it's incredible. I was thinking of Fernando
Lavin.
He was probably the nicest, most interesting guy I worked with, with all those people.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. My two women come to mind. Elizabeth Scott, who, my God, I loved her noir work and the Martin and Lewis movies she made. And then there she is on Burke's Law. And it's like, wow. And Mary Astor from the Maltese Falcon and Across the Pacific, I believe.
Right.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like these, as you say, and including the list that you've just thrown out there.
And by the way, every woman I had idolized and gone crazy as a kid worked on that show. So one day I'd be there and in walks Linda Darnell.
Yeah.
Who normally would, I probably couldn't talk. And then Rhonda Fleming would come in.
Wow.
And then Anne Francis would come in.
Yes.
And then how about Ida Lupino? And
unbelievable.
Louise.
Yes.
And then Lorraine Day.
Jeez. Lorraine Day, Leo DeRocher's wife, of course, and a great actress. Absolutely.
Who? I'm sorry, what?
Leo DeRocher's wife, of course, Lorraine Day. The ball player and manager and stuff. He married Lorraine Day.
Right.
So, honestly, and that's the thing, Gary. So it's great that even this little cliff note of these actors that you're mentioning.
By the way, how about Jayne Mansfield?
I didn't know she did a Burke's Law. That's amazing.
On her, and she walks on the set, and I'm the one she has to do, and I'm sitting there, and I had to act with all these incredible women. Dorothy Lamour. I had to act as if I was not a crazy guy.
Right. Absolutely. Oh my God, that is great, and I'm so glad you listed those. And truly, that's why let's absolutely. And I'll talk to Stephanie, and we'll schedule another conversation.
Yeah, please do. This is a lot of fun, and what I do is I get to relive those wonderful times and days and things that I was thinking of another woman that was there oh my God, Mamie Van Doren. Remember her?
Oh, of course. And thank God still with us. I follow her on Twitter. Fascinating woman. I read her autobiography. Very fascinating woman.
Yeah. And what a beauty, huh?
Oh my God, yes. Well, that period of the blonde bombshells, as you mentioned, Mansfield as well. And and that effort by Fox to find that next Marilyn Monroe, I think it's amazing. Yeah. I think it's amazing. Yeah, again, truly, Gary. Like I said, I'm an old movie and television fan. This is why I really appreciate the work that you did and the time that you did it, because as you said, it really was this really interesting time when television was really coming of age. And
it ain't coming back, man.
No, it can't. It's
not like this anymore. We're in an age that is significantly changed, and for these wonderful times, you have to look more back than forward.
Yes. Well, thank God the body of work is there for us to look at, and I'm really glad that my audience also appreciates conversations like this, whether it's in comics or in television and film. So truly, I can't thank you enough for this time. And honestly, I'm emailing Stephanie as soon as we hang up and saying, please, let's schedule part 2.
Let me ask you frankly, did I enjoy it too much? Did you send that?
Oh, no. Truly, Gary, that's great to hear. And truly, it is so flattering, again, that you took the time to listen to what I do. And I hope I
was trying to be a little bit balanced, removed, and not overly excited about talking about all these things. But somebody like you, that's what's wonderful, because you know all these people and you have all of those wonderful moments and notes that you can draw upon. It's really, really fabulous, wonderful.
Well, thank you, and truly, again, to have the opportunity to speak to someone like you is a genuine pleasure. and opportunity. And please, before we hang up now, let Marion know, I remember watching Jack and the Beanstalk as a kid.
Oh, no kidding.
I swear, absolutely, man. I'm like, as I was looking up her Wikipedia page, and I'm like, I remember that Gene Kelly Jack and the Beanstalk. Absolutely, that's amazing. So hilarious.
Yeah, and Marion, we got married. It almost seems like day one. We're at UCLA. I looked at her. I'd never seen anybody more beautiful, and somehow she saw something in me that she's still yet to explain. And it was love at first sight, and we're still married.
That's great. Well, you both did good. So congratulations to both of you. Absolutely.
Okay, let's do this again. I enjoyed it immensely, and we barely touched a lot of subjects there. I've got to go on and on a lot more about, which I think is about the vineyard and how that all began and how important it is, and the whole importance of wine and what our wine is all about now.
Sure.
And I want to make a lot of points there because it has ultimately to do with food, with health. It has to do with minerals. It has to do with the reason we're the healthiest country on earth right now, because we don't understand that issue, and our wine has more minerals than any food in the world. And why is that the case? All of that is not only interesting subject matter, but it's life and death subject matter.
I'm nodding. I understand, sir. Absolutely. I'm happy to get into that. Also, some of the other amazing turns in your career that I think are fun to talk about as well, as far as your film and TV work. And again, there's still more to talk about with Land of the Giants, for that matter, let alone Burke's Law. So
I want to talk about Woman's Story that is yet still to come out for a lot of reasons, and it's a film that, as a painter, as an artist, I directed it, and to me, and it's been backed up by this in reviews. It's really, and it's yet to really, it's a whole subject in itself of how later than it coming out. But when the greater public will see it, they're going to see one of the very first really artistic films made here in Hollywood. Artistic meaning, we could go into that because it's a term that kind of loses its meaning. But artistic, where each it's not just a scene.
I understand. No, that would be terrific.
All right, so
truly.
You have my email, right?
Well, I have it through Stephanie, or I have Stephanie's contact info.
Okay. You contact me there. That's fine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. All right. Absolutely. It was wonderful talking to you. I look forward that we continue. There's a lot left out, and that'll be, as I mentioned again, vital importance to people. Vital importance.
It would be my pleasure, and truly, like I said, I just didn't want to monopolize your entire afternoon. I do 3-hour conversations, and I've done them in the past. But like I said, I just don't want to, especially in a first conversation, all right, kids, shut up.
Right. All right, so I look forward, we get back with it. It's wonderful talking to you for a lot of reasons, and I think you know most of them because you are the person. And your background is just extraordinary, your knowledge.
That's a high compliment, sir. I genuinely appreciate that. And as I say, depending on how the rest of your month is, would love to do it before the end of the month.
All right. We'll do it for sure.
Gary, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. And thank you for being who you are and having such a program.
Gary Conway, what a conversation, what a sweet guy, and truly, what an honor to be able to speak to him. I'm so looking forward to part 2. I hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks when we have that conversation. What can I say? I'm a fan. Also, this is a big day on Word Balloon because I'm trying to play catch-up. I have to apologize, everybody. I had issues with my laptop that I do most of my audio and video editing on, and as a consequence, I hadn't been able to release any new audio. So I hope you enjoyed the reruns that I've been putting out that had Halloween themes to them, whether it were horror TV or horror comics or horror movies. And, there's still a little time before Halloween. But again, I've got a backlog of audio that I want to share with you. Not only this great conversation with Gary, but also being released today, a wonderful conversation with Mark Guggenheim, the great television and comic book writer that created the Arrowverse, co-created the Arrowverse, shows like Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow in particular, and also Eli Stone and wonderful movies. Lots of great discussion that we had on Monday. And Rob Salkowitz as well, who I spoke to last night on Word Balloon Live. Rob is a pop culture market observer, and we talk about as we slowly come out of COVID and the recent conventions, and how are things going on the convention scene, but also the publishers, the television networks, the film companies. How is everybody responding as we come out of lockdown and try to sort things out? So those 2 episodes also dropping today on Word Balloon. I hope you'll check it all out. Thanks again for listening. John Sutter saying goodbye and talk to you next time. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.